Hello, everybody. How's it going? I'm going to be talking about the Philadelphia experiment today. Now, the Philadelphia experiment is a conspiracy theory that states that in October of 1943, the United States government conducted an experiment at a shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, using the U.S. naval warship known as the USS Aldridge. And that this experiment included things such as time travel, teleportation, and invisibility, and went horribly wrong to the point where multiple people died and were severely injured. Now, how did this all happen? Well, let me explain the conspiracy. It all goes back to the year 1955 when a man known as Morris Ketchup Jessup published a novel which was called The Case for the UFO. Case for the UFO was a novel that explained how possibly a UFO could work and operate in real life, and it went over various alien sightings over the years. And like I said, it explained and theorized how possibly a real life UFO would actually work and operate if one were to really exist. And this novel became very popular, and people began sending a lot of fan mail to Morris Ketchum Jessup. Now, one of these fan letters was from a man known as Carl Medford Allen, though when he sent his letters, he went under the pseudonym of Carlos Miguel Alalande. And in these and in one of these letters, he described what he had seen and it was the man who created the story of the alleged Philadelphia experiment. Now, according to him, back on October 28th, 1943, while he was stationed at at a shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the United States government conducted an experiment to try and create invisible ships so that the German army couldn't spot them. And this is where the Philadelphia experiment comes in. He claimed that he saw it all go down, and what happened was that they used the USS Aldridge to conduct this experiment, and they had the entire crew on board. When the experiment began, the entire ship was engulfed in a thick green fog, and after a few seconds, the ship was gone. Nowhere to be seen. It had completely vanished. But what's strange is that 10 minutes prior to the ship getting submerged in the green thick fog and the experiment even beginning, the ship had appeared in Norfolk, Virginia. Now, Norfolk, Virginia is 200 miles away from Pennsylvania, Philadelphia specifically. And so not only had the USS Aldridge just gone back in time, having appeared 10 minutes before it left to Pennsylvania, but it also traveled 200 miles, appearing in Norfolk after originally being in Pennsylvania. Now, after 10 minutes passed, and it reappeared in where it originally was, that's when something went very horribly wrong. See, the experiment had caused severe, horrific injuries to the crew. Some of the crew had been fused with the metal walls down to a molecular level and couldn't be separated. And some of them went mad and lost their minds. Some of them outright just disappeared, while some of them were severely burned and injured from the experiment. And a lot of the people who were trapped in the walls, fused with it down to the very small molecular level, nothing could be done about them, and they simply just died. And after that, the government ended the experiment because of how horribly it went. Now, and this is where, he's the only person to perpetrate this experiment, that this alleged experiment happened. Now, mind you, the USS Aldridge was not in either Philadelphia or Norfolk, and it wasn't in Pennsylvania, and it wasn't in Virginia on that day. We have the records of where that ship was on that day and the surrounding days before and after, and it was not known in those days. It was actually in New York at the time when these experiments would have even happened. Now, about a year later, Morris gets called in by the Office of Naval Research as they have a few questions to ask him, as they had been mailed a copy of his book, The Case for the UFO, but there was a bunch of writings in the margins. Now, the writings in the margins were all in different handwriting styles and were all in different shades of blue ink. And these these three individual people referred to themselves as the gypsies, and alongside that, they all made references and mentions to the Philadelphia experiment and made references to aliens and talked about aliens and similar things of the sort. And that's why they brought him in. Now Morris took a look at it, and he immediately recognized it as being the work of Carl Allen, due to the way it was written. And it became very clear very quickly that Carl Allen had done all of this, was the one behind it, as it became very clear that he had gone to the length of intending to write in different hand styles using different ink to try and write it. Now, this is mostly where the story of it ends, as he was the only one who ever came out and claimed to be the guy, claimed that it ever happened, and there was no proof that the Philadelphia experiment, as we know it, did happen. The U.S. government did experiment with attempting to make their ships invisible, but only to radars and from detection from the Germans, as they were in the middle of World War II. They didn't attempt to experiment in any sort of way that was talked about in the Philadelphia experiment, full out invisibility, like how the story said, or teleportation, or even time travel. And the reason why the Office of Naval Research brought him in, because some of the stuff that was talked about in the writings was sort of similar to some of the things they had conducted back in the years prior, with the whole thing of invisibility and making their ships invisible, which was in a way similar to what they had, and which is why they brought him in. Now, Morris eventually committed suicide in 1959 after his following books proved unsuccessful, and he had been dropped by his book company. Now, many years later on, Carl Allen, when asked about it all, said that he had made it all up just to scare Jessup. And though in later years, when other people tried to interview him, they couldn't really get an answer out of him, or he was extremely hard to contact. As for most people, getting an answer out of him has been very difficult. And this is one of the few answers people were able to get out of him, that he simply just wanted to scare him, and that he made it up. Though those were only a few decades after the initial events, as in later 30 years after the events, he was either uncontactable or didn't want to talk about it. So for one reason or another, he decided he didn't really want to talk about it in later years, though in seemingly some of the years following, he was more willing to talk about it, though. But yeah, that's the story of the Philadelphia experiment. It's a pretty interesting story, wouldn't you say? I mean, you got teleportation, you got time travel, you got invisibility, you got people getting stuck in the walls, stuff like that. And of course, it's just a conspiracy theory, But it's a pretty interesting. But I do say it's a pretty interesting story, and it did get adapted into a 1984 science fiction film, which is based off of directly the conspiracy theory. But yeah, that's all I gotta say, ladies and gentlemen. Bye. Have a nice time.